The morning sun glared off the courthouse windows as reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing like a storm. Inside, a man sat in handcuffs, calm, silent, eyes sharp as a hawk's. His name was Ethan Cole, a retired Marine sniper with a record that could fill a museum wall. He'd served in some of the most dangerous missions overseas, earning medals he never bragged about. Now, he was sitting in a courtroom, accused of assaulting 2 police officers. The truth, however, was far more complicated. Ethan had been arrested outside his home 3 days earlier after breaking up a violent argument in his neighborhood. The responding officers didn't care to listen. They saw a man standing over another and assumed the worst. Within minutes, he was on the ground, cuffed, and thrown into a cruiser. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He just looked one of the officers dead in the eye and said quietly, "You're making a mistake." At the time, no one believed him. But that was about to change. Because the moment the bail hearing began, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and in walked a 4-star general in full uniform, flanked by 2 aides. The crowd gasped. The judge froze mid-sentence. And Ethan just smiled faintly. The courtroom went silent as the 4-star general strode forward with an air of authority that made even the officers guarding the room stiffen. His medals caught the light, his uniform immaculate, and his expression unreadable. The judge cleared her throat. "General, may I ask why you're here?" The general stopped beside the defense table and looked down at Ethan, who gave him a respectful nod. "I'm here," the general said, voice deep and commanding, "because this man sitting before you is a national hero, and what's happening here is a disgrace." A murmur swept through the crowd. The prosecutor looked annoyed, whispering to his assistant, while the police officers in the back exchanged uneasy glances. The judge frowned. "General, I'll remind you this is a court of law, unless you have relevant testimony." "I do," the general interrupted. "You're trying to convict a man who once saved my entire unit overseas. Without Sergeant Ethan Cole, I wouldn't be standing here. None of U.S. would." Reporters began scribbling furiously. Cameras turned toward the general. The tension in the room thickened like smoke. The judge blinked, then slowly leaned back in her chair. "You're saying he saved your life?" The general nodded. "Not just mine. 23 men. He carried 2 of them on his shoulders while under enemy fire. The man you've got chained here was once the sharpest eye in the Corps. And now you've arrested him for stopping a fight?" The room erupted in whispers. Ethan sat silently, his face calm, though his jaw tightened slightly. He had no interest in fame or recognition, but the truth was finally being spoken, and it was only the beginning. The prosecutor rose from his seat, trying to regain control of the room. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the defendant's military record doesn't excuse his actions. The evidence shows he assaulted 2 officers." The general turned his head sharply. "Assaulted?" he repeated, his tone cutting like a blade. "You call defending a woman from being beaten an assault?" Gasps rippled across the courtroom. Ethan remained motionless, his gaze fixed ahead. The judge raised a hand. "General, please explain what you mean." The general placed a folder on the table in front of him. "These are body cam transcripts. Someone sent them to my office last night. They show exactly what happened." The prosecutor's face drained the color. "That footage is sealed." "Not anymore," the general said, sliding a flash drive across the table. "I requested it through federal channels. You'll see that Sergeant Cole was breaking up a violent altercation between a man and his girlfriend. He subdued the attacker, unarmed, non-lethally, before officers arrived. When they got there, they didn't ask questions. They tackled him." The judge motioned to the bailiff, who took the drive and plugged it into the court's monitor. The video flickered to life. The sound of shouting filled the room. Ethan's voice was calm, commanding, trying to de-escalate. Then the woman screamed, and Ethan moved fast, pinning the attacker to ground just as sirens wailed. 2 officers jumped from their cars, shouting orders. And then, without hesitation, they tackled Ethan. The footage stopped. The silence afterward was deafening. Even the prosecutor stared at the screen, speechless. The general turned toward the bench. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "that's what you're calling a crime." The judge looked at Ethan, then back at the general, her expression softening. "This case," she said slowly, "just took a very different turn." The judge folded her hands, deep in thought. "Mr. Cole," she said finally, "do you have anything you wish to say before we proceed?" Ethan lifted his eyes. His voice was calm, steady, the same tone he used giving orders in the field. "No, Your Honor. I just did what I've always done. Protect people who couldn't protect themselves." The general gave a small nod, pride flickering in his eyes. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, we may need time to review this footage." "You've had 3 days," the judge replied firmly. "You arrested a man without confirming the facts. That's not justice. That's negligence." A reporter in the front row whispered to another, "This is going to be front-page news." The general stepped forward again. "If I may add," he said, "Sergeant Cole has served this country with honor for over 15 years. He's carried scars most people will never understand. Yet he's never once used his past as an excuse. You should be giving him a medal, not putting him in chains." The judge exhaled slowly, her tone softening. "Sergeant Cole, I see no reason to hold you another moment." She turned to the bailiff. "Remove his cuffs." As the medal clicked open, the courtroom broke into quiet applause, something rarely seen in such a place. Ethan stood, rubbing his wrists, but his face remained stoic. The general placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're coming with me, son," he said. "There's someone who wants to thank you personally." The crowd murmured again, confused but intrigued. Ethan looked at him with mild surprise. "Sir, who?" The general smiled faintly. "The Secretary of Defense." The entire courtroom fell silent again. Outside the courthouse, the media swarmed like bees. Reporters shouted questions, microphones flashing in Ethan's face as he and the general walked side by side down the marble steps. "Sergeant Cole, how does it feel to be free? Do you plan to press charges against the officers? Is it true the Pentagon got involved?" Ethan didn't respond. The general raised a hand, and the crowd quieted instantly. "This man deserves peace," he said firmly. "He's done more for this country than most will ever know. Let him breathe." The 2 men climbed into a black military SUV, waiting by the curb. The doors shut, muting the chaos outside. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan turned his head. "Sir, I never wanted this attention. I just couldn't stand by while someone got hurt." The general smiled slightly. "That's exactly why we need men like you back. The world's changing, Cole. We need integrity, people who act when it matters." Ethan looked out the window, watching the courthouse fade in the distance. "I've seen enough of the battlefield, sir. I just want a quiet life." "I understand," the general said, "but sometimes quiet men are the ones who make the loudest difference." They drove in silence until the vehicle turned into a secure military compound. Soldiers at the gate saluted as the SUV rolled through. Inside, a small crowd of officers stood waiting. At the center was a woman, in a dark suit, the Secretary of Defense herself. She stepped forward, extending her hand. "Sergeant Cole," she said warmly, "on behalf of this nation, I want to personally apologize for what you've been through, and thank you for reminding us what true honor looks like." Ethan shook her hand, his expression humble. "Ma'am, I just did what anyone should." She smiled. "That's what makes it rare." Then she turned to the general. "Let's make sure this story doesn't end here. I want the truth made public." The general nodded. "It already is, ma'am." Cameras were rolling in that courtroom. And indeed, by that evening, the headline flashed across every major network. "Marine hero wrongfully arrested, freed after 4-star general's courtroom intervention." Ethan's quiet act of courage had once again shaken the nation. Only this time, not from behind a rifle, but from the strength of his character. The story spread like wildfire across the country. News stations replayed the courtroom footage again and again, Ethan standing silently while the general spoke for him the moment the judge ordered his release, the applause that followed. Social media exploded with praise. Veterans groups called him a symbol of integrity, while everyday people saw him as a reminder that real heroes still existed. But not everyone celebrated. The two arresting officers found themselves under investigation within 24 hours. Their body cam footage, now public, showed how quickly they'd acted without verifying what had actually happened. The police department released a formal statement acknowledging the mistake and placed both men on leave pending review. Ethan, however, wanted no part in revenge. When reporters asked for comment, he said, simply, "I don't hate anyone. I just hope they learn from this. We all wear a uniform to protect others, not our pride." That line alone was quoted in headlines nationwide. Weeks later, Ethan received a letter in the mail bearing a military seal. Inside was an invitation to the Pentagon. He hesitated at first, but the general's handwritten note convinced him. The country still needs you in one way or another. At the ceremony, the Secretary of Defense pinned a medal on his chest. Cameras flashed, but Ethan's mind drifted to quiet moments. Faces of his fallen brothers, memories of distant battles, and the peace he had fought so long to find. As the applause faded, the general leaned close and said, "You didn't just clear your name, son. You reminded us what honor looks like when the world forgets." Ethan smiled faintly. Then maybe it was all worth it. Outside, the autumn wind swept across the Pentagon steps. For the first time in years, Ethan felt no weight on his shoulders, only freedom and a sense that the world had finally seen him for who he truly was. Months passed, and the world slowly moved on, but Ethan Cole's name never truly faded. His story became part of military ethics courses, cited as an example of restraint, humility, and courage under pressure. The two officers who arrested him publicly apologized during a press conference. One of them, visibly shaken, said, "I judged before I understood. Sergeant Cole showed me what real discipline looks like." Ethan accepted their apology without hesitation. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is whether we grow from them." The general, now retired, kept in touch with Ethan often. They would meet at a quiet cafe near a lake. Two soldiers who had seen too much of the world but found peace in silence. "You could have turned this into fame," the general said one morning, sipping his coffee. "Instead, you just disappeared." Ethan smiled. "Sir, I didn't disappear. I just went home." He had moved to a small town, opened a shooting range that doubled as a discipline and safety school for young recruits. His motto hung above the door: "Honor isn't given, it's proven." One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, a young cadet asked him, "Sir, do you ever regret anything?" Ethan paused, looking at the horizon. "No," he said quietly, "because everything that tried to break me only reminded me who I am." And with that, the Marine sniper who once stood alone in a courtroom finally found his peace. Not in medals, not in headlines, but in the quiet respect of a nation that had almost forgotten what true integrity looked like. Years later, long after the headlines had faded, Ethan Cole's story continued to echo in unexpected places. His name appeared in training manuals for both soldiers and police cadets, under a section titled Courage with Restraint. At the Marine Corps Museum, a small display case was added. A photo of Ethan in uniform, standing beside the four-star general, with a simple plaque beneath it. He defended the innocent twice, once abroad and once at home. The general himself passed away peacefully a few years later. At his funeral, attended by hundreds of service members, Ethan stood quietly in the back. When it was his turn to speak, he said only one thing: "He taught me that rank fades, but character lasts forever." Afterward, Ethan returned to his small town, where his range had become a safe haven for veterans struggling to adapt to civilian life. He listened more than he spoke, taught discipline through calm guidance, and made sure no one ever felt forgotten. One day, a letter arrived, this time from the White House. The president wanted to honor him at a national ceremony for his extraordinary conduct under unjust circumstances. Ethan politely declined. Instead, he mailed back a short note that simply read, "Real honor doesn't need a stage. It lives in how we treat people when no one's watching." That line would later be quoted across social media, engraved on veteran memorials, and even printed on academy walls. And though Ethan never sought fame or forgiveness, he became something greater, A quiet reminder that the measure of a hero isn't the medals they earn, but the humility they carry when the world misjudges them. He was once a sniper, a soldier, and a prisoner of misunderstanding. But in the end, he became a legend of grace, justice, and unshakable honor. Years after the courtroom incident, Ethan's actions continued to shape lives in ways he never expected. His calm defiance in the face of injustice had inspired countless people, soldiers, police officers, and ordinary citizens alike. A new police training initiative was launched, built around a case study titled The Cole Protocol. It focused on judgment, restraint, and communication before force. It became mandatory reading for every recruit in multiple states. Ethan never took credit, but the general's words from that day, "You're trying to convict a man who saved lives," were printed on the first page of every manual. Meanwhile, Ethan's small-town range evolved into a community center for veterans. It wasn't about weapons anymore. It was about rebuilding purpose. He taught leadership workshops, survival skills, and above all, self-control. Many of his students were young people searching for direction, and they found in him a quiet mentor who led by example. One day, a familiar face appeared at his door. The same officer who had handcuffed him years ago, dressed in civilian clothes. He looked nervous. "Sergeant Cole," he said softly, "I've left the force. I'm starting over, and I was wondering if you'd let me help out here." Ethan studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. Everyone deserves a second chance. They shook hands, the same two men who once stood on opposite sides of the law. This time, they worked together, teaching others what they'd both learned the hard way. In time, Ethan's story wasn't remembered for the arrest or the courtroom drama. It was remembered for what came after. He had turned humiliation into humility, injustice into change, and anger into wisdom. And as the years passed, when people spoke of him, they didn't call him the sniper or the Marine who was arrested. They called him a man who changed how the world saw honor. Years later, a documentary crew came to visit Ethan's town. They wanted to record his story, not the firefights or the medals, but the quiet moment when the justice system turned on itself and then found redemption. Ethan hesitated at first, but agreed when he learned the film would focus on veterans' transitions back into civilian life. The interview took place at his range, now overgrown with wildflowers, the sound of birds replacing the echo of gunfire. The interviewer asked softly, "If you could go back to that day in court, would you change anything?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Not a thing," he said. "That day wasn't about me. It was about truth. Sometimes it takes being misunderstood to show people what integrity really means." He paused and added, "You can lose your freedom, your career, even your reputation, but if you keep your character, you've lost nothing that truly matters." The crew went silent for a long moment. That single line would later become the title of the documentary, Character Under Fire, the Ethan Cole story. When the film premiered years later, audiences across the country sat in stunned silence as they watched the real courtroom footage. By the end, many were in tears, not from pity, but from admiration. And though Ethan never sought glory, his quiet dignity became something larger than any medal could offer. Teachers played the film in classrooms. Military academies screened it for cadets. Even police departments used it to train recruits on patience, empathy, and truth. In the final scene of the documentary, Ethan is seen closing the gate to his range at sunset. His voice narrates softly, "Honor isn't about being perfect. It's about standing still when everyone else runs, and doing the right thing even when no one believes you." As the screen faded to black, a line appeared, dedicated to all who serve with humility and courage. And with that, Ethan Cole's story, born from injustice, defined by grace, became immortal. The years rolled on, and the world changed faster than anyone could follow. Yet in the quiet corners of small-town America, one man's story still echoed, not through fame or politics, but through the lives he quietly touched. Ethan Cole never sought the spotlight again. His range became a sanctuary for those struggling with their own battles. Soldiers haunted by memories, police officers burdened by guilt, and young people searching for direction. He gave them patience, not pity, strength, not sympathy. Every morning, he raised the flag outside the range himself. He never missed a day. To him, It wasn't ceremony, it was gratitude. Sometimes, townspeople would stop by just to thank him. He always smiled and said the same thing. Don't thank me, just pay it forward. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78, the news spread quietly. No headlines, no breaking stories. But across the country, veterans, officers, and citizens share his name online with a single phrase. He reminded us what honor truly means. At his funeral, a folded flag was placed on his coffin. Standing among the mourners was the son of one of the officers who'd once arrested him, now a police captain himself. With tears in his eyes, he saluted and whispered, "Rest easy, sir. We learned." Years later, a bronze plaque was placed at the entrance to the police academy, engraved with his words, "Power is nothing without discipline. Justice is nothing without truth. And service means nothing without humility." Beneath it, just one name, Ethan Cole, Marine protector, teacher, hero. And though time moved on, his legacy never faded. A reminder that one act of quiet courage could ripple across generations. The end.